It was in the summer of 1983 that a fellow named Henry Nouwen was walking down the street in a place called Trosley, France. Anybody recognize the name Henry Nouwen? Oh, sure. Some of you do. Henry Nouwen was a Roman Catholic priest and scholar. He had written many books, had some deep and profound insights. But on that particular summer day, 1983, he's walking down the street, and he's on his way to an appointment, and he turns at the building where he's to meet this man, and as he goes to knock on the door, he sees this picture here, and it's on the front of your bulletin, and it'll be in the front of the sanctuary in a moment. There it is. Now, right away, when you see that picture, you probably are reminded of a story in the Bible. I hope you are. It's a painting of the story of the Prodigal Son. It's an amazing picture. It's a picture that has been painted, that was painted by a painter by the name of Rembrandt. Maybe you've heard of him. And he did it in the 17th century. And he painted it towards the very end of his life. Scholars say within a year or two after painting this, he passed away. When Henry Nouwen saw that replica of this painting on that doorway, he stood and stared at it, and he was transfixed, and it just got a hold of his heart, and he had a copy of it, and he obtained a copy of it, and he carried it with him wherever he went, and he determined that someday he would see this painting for himself. It just so happens that this painting then and still today hangs in the museum called the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. And the day came when he had business to take care of there in Russia, not far from where that museum was. And he made arrangements to see the painting. He actually had a friend that had a connection with somebody inside the museum. And usually you had to wait for an hour or two outside before the doors opened to even get into the museum. And this was one of the most popular paintings in that museum. But he had connections, and so he got in, and he stood in front of the painting for a mighty long time. By the way, that painting, you can't tell it, of course, by looking there up on the screen or on the front of your bulletin, but that's a large painting. I mean, it's something like roughly six foot wide by 8.5 foot tall. I mean, it's a big painting. And so when Henry Nouwen went down the hallway and found where this picture was displayed, he stood there transfixed in front of that painting. And he stood there and he stared, and finally somebody that worked there, I think it was a guard, said, "Man, you need to take a break." And Henry said, "I can't do that." So somebody got him a chair so he could sit down. And he sat down in front of the painting, and I think I have it right when I tell you that he got there at such a point where he had 4 or 5 hours before the museum closed, and every moment he was in the museum, he stood or sat right in front of this painting. The guard came and said, "I'm sorry, sir, you're going to have to leave. It's time to close the museum." And Henry said, "Okay." But he left, and he said to himself, "I'm not done yet. I have to go back." He went back the next morning and found the painting and stood there in front of the painting and got a chair, and he was there for several more hours, just soaking in this amazing painting. And as a result of that, he wrote a book that I highly recommend, and I've read, and a couple of the insights that I'm going to share are from Henry Nouwen's book called The Homecoming, which is actually the name of the painting. And really what I want to do is I want to preach a three-series sermon on the story of the prodigal. And of course, you see all of the characters up there on the screen. You see the son kneeling before the father, and you see, of course, the elder brother there on the right. Now, I ought to tell you that one of the things that I have done is I took this picture and I ran it through my photo editor, and I messed with it just a little bit. And what I did was I lightened the shadows. Because if you will see other pictures, if you Google it right now and on your phone, you'll see that what you have on your phone, the picture is a little bit darker, and the shadows are darker, and it really, maybe I should have left it that way, but I lightened it so you could see everything that's going on there. And it's fascinating. Look at that person in the background in the middle there. It's really difficult to see without having that picture, the shadows brought up a little bit so you could see what's going on. So there's a lot of detail there that you can see with the shadows lifted a little bit. You know, one of the things that Henry Nouwen observes in his book as he looked at that picture hour after hour after hour is that there are people standing in the background watching. And he says that often Christianity is like that. You have a lot of people standing in the shadows, standing back, and they're just watching. They're not involved. They just stand back and they watch. One of the other really, to me, interesting observations that he makes is that he discovered that art scholars say that when you look at the head of the prodigal, that's a self-portrait of Rembrandt when he was a young man. And then they say that if you look at the face of the elder brother, that's a self-portrait of Rembrandt when he was middle-aged. And then, yes, when you look at the face of the Father, who represents, of course, God, when you look at his face, that's a self-portrait of Rembrandt when he's an old man. And there's this underlying thread, this underlying suggestion that there is a progression in the story and in the painting, that we all start out as the rebel. And then once we are found and come back, we're like this and we become like the elder brother. But then Henry Nouwen goes on to say, and I'll talk more about this, of course, a little bit later, but he goes on to say, but at the end, we all ought to be like the Father. The stages that you go through in your spiritual journey. Well, let's begin in Luke chapter 15. And this morning I want to read verses 11 to 15. Reading from Luke 15, 11 to 15. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs." Now, if you just read that story, as we just have done together, and think about it in terms of our present culture, we say it's a disturbing story. And we say it's a disturbing story because you have a young man who goes to his father, and he's a little bit, I don't know, I kind of like this word, impertinent. I mean, he's out of order to say to his dad, you know what? I want my inheritance now. And I don't know if parents here, if you ever had a child that would come to you and say, you know what? I want my inheritance now. I don't know how you would feel. I think you might be a little bit insulted. You'd be like, what? Really? You know, I mean, so it's that kind of thing. I mean, we read it and we're like, wow, this sounds like a storyline for Dr. Phil. You know, I mean, that's just kind of maybe how we look at it. But when you remind yourself of the culture of 2,000 years ago, and remind yourself that the law of the day 2,000 years ago was that no inheritance was passed until the father died. That was the law. And so really what this son is saying to his dad is this: I wish you were dead. I want you dead. Because I want what's coming to me, and I want it now. I ain't waiting. I want you dead. See, it's a little bit different than a storyline for Dr. Phil, which might just be kind of interesting. This is a very serious matter. I mean, incredibly serious. And in fact, it was so serious that 2,000 years ago, if a child would show disrespect to his father, it was permissible for the father to take that son out and stone him and kill him. I mean, that's the magnitude of what we're talking about in this story. And surely the people in the village would gather together and they'd grab a stone too. Because not only has the son sinned and grieved the father, he's also rebelled against the entire community. I mean, we're talking about something really serious in this story. And then Jesus goes on and tells more details of the story. And it says that the younger son, he took his inheritance and he headed off for a distant country. And so now let's just recap. He's rebelled against his father. He's rebelled against his dad. He's rebelled against the laws. He's rebelled against his religion. And he's rebelled against the village, because the entire village felt the gravity of the situation. He's a first-class rebel. His actions truly speak louder than words, because what he's saying is, I will do what I want to do. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what religion says. I don't care what the custom says. I don't care what the community says. I will call the shots. I am the center of the universe, is really what he's saying. And so then Jesus makes the observation that he goes to this distant country and he lives this kind of rowdy life, and he blows through all of his inheritance and he wastes it, and everything is gone. And then this huge famine comes and he has no money to buy food and he becomes needy. And the text says that there at the end of verse 19, beg your pardon, at the end, let's go, there we go, thank you. At the end of verse 15, he hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country that sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And any Jewish person reading that or hearing that would say to themselves, no! You know that for a Jewish person, pigs were taboo. They were associated with Canaanite worship. You didn't do that. You had nothing to do with pigs. I mean, It was anathema. You know. And so here he is. He's going to go work for someone who has pigs, and it just blows your mind. It indicates how far he has fallen, and in fact, it does indicate that he's probably is literally in a different country, because it'd be hard to find a pig in the Holy Land, in Israel. He has fallen and fallen hard. He's fallen far from God. It's the classic story of rebellion that we find there in the Garden of Eden, and it's the story of rebellion that continues to this very day. I think several weeks ago I mentioned to you about in the story of the creation of man. I think it's Genesis 2:7, where God breathed into man, or into this dust, the breath of life, and man became a living, and we say soul became a living being. And I pointed out to you several weeks ago that in that verse, the Hebrew word is nephesh, and that can be translated as the word appetite. That God created us with an appetite for Him. We are hardwired to hunger and thirst after God. That's where we find fulfillment. But here we see in Genesis that story of rebellion where Adam rebelled against God. God is the original hurt father. And Adam is the original first prodigal. And Adam went to a distant country. He left the Garden of Eden. It's the story now all over again. And so here we have this younger brother who has rebelled against his father, and he's directed his appetite that is hardwired for God toward other things. He's like, if I have the money that's coming to me, then I'll be happy. And then if I go to another place, if I get out of this country, get away from my dad and away from all this religious stuff, then I'll be happy. If I spend my money on buying these other things, surely all this stuff it's all going to make me happy. But he's discovered that nothing can make him happy. Not a single thing will meet the deep longing of his heart, no matter how hard he tried and how often he chased after other things. Nothing made him happy. And it's because he is hardwired to find his happiness in God. It's coded into his DNA. His appetites ran wild, and he thought he was free to make all these decisions. But the more he rebelled against God and exercised his free will to make the wrong choice, the more he became enslaved, not free. So I'll just stop right there this morning and ask the question, do you see yourself as the prodigal? I hope so, because we've all been the prodigal. We've all rebelled against God. Even the best church kids. Everyone has rebelled against God. And you just think about it. God wanted you to do something and you did something else. God wanted you to go somewhere and you said, no, not right now. I'm going to go somewhere else. God directed you to do something, say something, and you were like, nope. We have all been first-class rebels. At some point or another, we all have thought we knew better than God. God wanted to direct our steps, directed our life, and we're like, nope, not right now. Check back with me a little bit later. Maybe then. And so we did our own thing. We went to our own distant country, and we were the boss. And we tried to fill the deep longing of our heart. I mean, I don't know the details of your story, but I know the main points of your story. Just rebel against God, try to make yourself happy apart from God, and then you found out that didn't work so well. Didn't work very well at all. I'm wondering maybe if there's anybody here today that is still trying to live under the self-delusion that says, if I just call my own shots, if I keep making my own decisions, if I keep chasing my own whatever and keep God out of the picture, someday I'll be happy. And I'm well aware of the fact that there might be some rebels here today that are still thinking that you can get along fine without God, that you're just going to call the shots, and that everything will be okay. All you need is a stroke of luck. All you need is for your ship to come in. I wonder if there's anybody like that today. If there is, I want to just tell you that this story teaches us that you will only have the longing of your heart met when it is at home with God. Nothing else. Nothing else will satisfy. Let's go to verses 16 to 20 now. Reading from 16 to 20. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father." So there is this son who thought he knew best. He thought he knew what he was doing. He thought he had everything under control. And he finds himself one morning as he wakes up. He has no money. He has nothing. He's laying with the pigs. And he's starving. But then something happened to him. And I'm looking there at verse 17. And you'll not hardly find any better verses in the Bible, any better words in the Bible than that opening phrase in verse 17. But when he came to himself, and maybe your translation says it a little bit different. I like the translation that says, but when he came to his senses. You know what that phrase means? That means hope has risen. When he came to his senses, he had hit rock bottom and he knew it. He knew he couldn't go anywhere lower. And all of a sudden the lights just came on. He's like, what have I done? What am I doing? And so he hatches this plan. He says, I'm going to go back to my father. I've sinned. I'm going to tell my father, will you take me back as one of your hired servants? Now let's take a minute and look at the picture. Let's go forward and look at that picture for a moment. And I want you to just see the son. Focus on the son for a moment and look how shabby he is. This is Rembrandt now, and Rembrandt's painting is an interpretation of the biblical text. It's not always true to the biblical text because it's his interpretation, and Rembrandt is making a point by the details that he puts into the painting. But notice that his head has been shaved. Who knows? Maybe that's to try to fight the fleas or the bugs. I don't know. But look at his clothes. He looks really, really shabby. Notice that on his left foot, his sandal is missing. I mean, he's just a mess. But do you see something else? Do you notice anything? In fact, it's hard to see there, but if you look at the picture on your bulletin. Actually, you can see it better there. Do you see any little detail that Rembrandt has put into the painting as you look closely at the sun? Look around his midsection and look to the right. It's really hard to see. You can't hardly see up there. But you can see it as you look there at the picture on your bulletin. He has a sword, a dagger, some sort of knife that is still strapped to his side. Do you see it in the picture there? And I think that's really an interesting observation there. I mean, why didn't he sell that? And again, this is not from the biblical text. This is Rembrandt making a point. But Rembrandt put it in there, and we have to ask the question, why? Why would Rembrandt do that? And if that was a reality, why wouldn't the lost prodigal sell that? Because he was sleeping, living with the pigs, and nobody would even give him the fodder for the pigs. Why did he keep that? And Henry Nouwen suggests that just maybe Rembrandt is wanting us to know that this dagger represents the fact that the lost prodigal, that he kept the sword because it was a reminder of whose he once was. That it was his connection to his father. And he kept it. And there's theological precedence for that. The Imago Dei, the image of God. We are taught from a theological point of view that we have all been created in the image of God, and no matter how far we have fallen, no matter how deeply we find ourselves in rebellion, no matter if we're living with the pigs and looking for pig food, no matter if we are a drug addict and we're sleeping in a corner of a crack house, no matter how far away from God we are, there's something deep down on the inside that cries out to have a relationship with God. It's that hardwiredness that is still there. And so here is this prodigal. He's fallen as low as you can fall, and he comes to his senses. Why in the world could somebody that has been rebellious so long and so hard and fallen so far and beyond the reach of anything that anybody could figure out, why is it that he said, oh, I should go back to my father? Why is it? It's because of the image of God in him. And again, I don't know your story, but maybe there are some folk here today that you resonate with that because you have a story of rebellion that you were far from God. Maybe you weren't sleeping with the pigs, but you were down and you were out. And somehow, some way, you came to your senses. Let me just quickly add that I'm very well aware of the fact, although I don't know any names or any stories in particular, but just because of the size of the crowd, I'm very well aware of the fact that there are moms and dads here that have prodigals. Do you have a prodigal? Slip up your hand. Let me just see. Yeah. I want to tell you, no matter how hard your prodigal has fallen, they are never beyond the reach of God. So if you have a prodigal and you've been worried about them, you've been praying for them, just keep on praying for them. But guess what? They were created in the image of God, and they are not beyond the reach of God. You be encouraged as a parent. Be encouraged. And pray that the day will come when they will come to their senses. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's somebody here today that's still deep in rebellion. I don't know. And maybe, if that's the case, this is your wake-up call. That you come to your senses. I mean, you didn't have to come to church today. Just maybe God engineered this so that you could come and be exposed to the story and be reminded that every lost prodigal needs to come back to God the Father. There's another interesting tidbit here in the story, and it's that when this lost prodigal hatches this plot to come back to his father, he says, I'm not worthy to come back as a son. But maybe Dad will take me back as the hired hand. It's like, what's that all about? And I think at some level we understand what that's all about. Because we understand this feeling of rebellion and this feeling of unworthiness to come back to God. This prodigal is saying, well, if I go back to my dad, he's really, really, really going to be mad, and rightfully so. Maybe I'll ask if I can be his hired hand, and I'm hoping he don't kill me. And there are times when you and I have been rebellious against God, and we did our own thing, and we looked up to God and said, I don't need you. Mind your own business. But then when we came to our senses and said, I'm going to come back to God, we say to ourselves, I hope you don't kill me. I don't know about you, but my very first picture I ever saw of God was when I was a little kid. And it was the picture that was on the very inside cover of our family Bible that weighed 42 pounds, and you could kill somebody with it. I mean, I think we kept, in my home, we didn't read the Bible. I think we kept it as a weapon in case somebody broke in at night. Bam, you dead. But I remember as a kid, I opened that front cover, and there was that picture of God. It's a family Bible, and there's God standing there like this, with fire coming out of his eyes. That long silver hair, that long robe. And it just looked like he was just really ticked off. And like he was just hunting for somebody to just point to and just incinerate. Like, ooh. So, I mean, I get it when I read this story and I'm like, the rebellious prodigal, he's like, oh man, I hope he doesn't kill me. Maybe if I just say, maybe I'll be one of your tired hands. Would that be okay? We're going to talk about it not today so much, but a little bit later on, next week and the following week. But of course, we know God is not like that. God is eager to restore every rebel. God is the Father who's standing there with his arms wide open, and he's looking down the lane, waiting, hoping that the prodigal will come to his senses and come home someday. That's the posture of God the Father. Every time I think of this story, I can't help but think of a song from a little struggling rock group in the late 60s and early 70s called the Eagles. Desperado. Why don't you come to your senses? You've been out riding fences for oh so long. Oh, you're a hard one. I know you got your reasons. Maybe you're here today and you can identify with that. Let me remind you this morning, you will only find happiness in a relationship with God the Father. And this morning he's calling every single rebel back to him. Every lost prodigal, whether they're in this room or outside this room, God is the God of love, and he's waiting for prodigals to come to their senses and to come back to him. Maybe there's somebody here today that's tired of trying to find happiness and peace in stuff, in things, in experiences, in possessions. I'm here to tell you, only God can meet the deep longing of your heart. Only God.